Hi, this is Mike Taylor from Jobs Radio, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Helen Sanders, who's the Managing Director of Wingrove Tailored Recruitment Solutions. So Helen, how are you?
Hi there, Mike. I'm really good. Thanks for inviting me along.
Now, today we're going to be talking about job seekers and why they should consider SMEs as a career choice. But before that, I'd just like to go back a bit in terms of your background, because an interesting stat about you, or an interesting bit of information, is that I believe you were the first female football commentator with BBC Radio.
I was. You're going a long time, a long time back, because these days there's quite a few of them. Some of them were around when I was around. It's still not mainstream in terms of commentary, and by commentary I mean 90 minutes on the radio from the first whistle all the way through to extra time and full time. Back then it was my first proper job out of university. I'd been working for the BBC as a freelancer throughout my university years, and had already worked for other sort of London radio stations, independent stations as well, on sport and news and showbiz and all sorts of things. But football was kind of a good place to be. So I was the first female football commentator for the BBC, where I covered an entire 90 minutes several times throughout a season. Stevenage Borough was my first game that I covered as a commentator, but week in, week out, for at least 2 games a week, I was their football reporter for either Watford, Luton, Stevenage Borough as football, and I also covered Saracens and Bedford for rugby union.
Oh, very impressive, very impressive. And I believe you had one of your most embarrassing moments at Vicarage Road.
Oh, no. Didn't we discuss we weren't going to talk about this? Yes. Okay. So most of the time I don't share this story unless someone buys me lunch. But because it's you, I'm going to share it with you. Although you already know it. So, yes, I trod on the big toe of a particular person. And it's the first and only time that I've ever been starstruck. I was in the tunnel at Vicarage Road, kind of rushing around before a game, and turned around. And as I turned around, I realised that I'd crunched on someone's toe, looked up, and who was it but Elton John? And it actually took me a moment to register, because the Elton John that I've seen on stage, I've been to see him on tour, is not the Elton John that you see at a football game.
Right.
They look somewhat different. And he was out of context. I mean, okay, you would see him at Vicarage Road, but I wasn't expecting to see him that day. So I was rather flummoxed after I trod on his toe, I have to say. I can't even remember what I said. I'm sure I apologised. I hope I apologised.
So
in my head, I apologise.
He's no longer the owner of Watford, so I guess that might be one of the reasons why.
No, I'm hoping that he didn't hobble. I have seen him walking on TV normally, so
okay.
I don't think I managed to hurt him that badly. Oh, dear.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's bring ourselves up to date now, and we're going to talk about why job seekers should consider small to medium-sized enterprises rather than going for the big corporate-type jobs. So what do you think the sort of options are on the table if someone's looking for a career in that sector of the market?
So in terms of, there are options on the table, aren't there, in terms of candidates, people looking for a new job. So if you're looking for a new job, you would look around and see, Yahoo, the Googles, the Coca-Colas, the Mars, the Marks and Spencers, McDonald's. You see all the big names. Aldi, are very big in terms of the recruitment market at the moment. You've also got your local authorities, who are massive employers locally. You've got the NHS, who are, I think, probably the largest employer in the UK, certainly amongst the big boys. And then you've got this other cluster, which are rather unsexily called SMEs. It sounds rather undignified, small and medium-sized enterprises. And that's basically, in the UK, they're defined as organisations that have less than 250 staff. That's for a medium size, less than 250 staff, and less than 250 million turnover. So that to me still sounds like a large company. I'm sure it does to you as well. And then a small business is a company where there's less than 50 employees and less than 6.5 million turnover. And they're not so obvious, because if there are only 50 of them in terms of the staff and in terms of 6.5 million turnover, you may not recognise their logo when they advertise. You may not recognise that actually that business where you've been buying your herbal tea from are based in the same town as you, but you don't see them as an SME, if that makes sense. So it's kind of, their logo, An example of that is Pukka Herbs, P-U-K-K-A Herbs. They're based in Bristol, and they're not a huge organisation, but they're kind of well known now. So, they've got the advantage that their stuff, the food, the things they provide, the teas, they're out in the supermarkets. And so people may look at them and say, yeah, okay, I'll work for them. Well, that's an SME. Or you've got the opposite of that, where you've perhaps got someone who develops apps for the iPhone, and they may be a staff of 5 or 10 and doing really cool techie stuff with the apps, and your skills may be perfect for them, but how do you know whether you want to work for them? So it's finding those kind of opportunities for you as well. And let's face it, a lot of people like to work in big organisations, but sometimes people don't like big organisations. You can kind of get lost and you may not learn as much. And so smaller SMEs are a really good option for people looking for jobs that can be overlooked because they're not as obvious.
Yeah, and I suppose it varies. You could be a graduate fresh out of university,
Yep.
and all the promotion by the companies is the larger ones, as you mentioned. But there are lots of opportunities with smaller companies, and I guess also for people looking to change jobs within the local area. So, what sort of advice would you get as the best way to identify where these SMEs are?
Okay, so the internet is a great source of information for pretty much anything and everything these days. If you use Facebook a lot, you will identify usually local companies because they'll be targeting you. So if you like someone on Facebook, as in a company, let's say it's your local florist, but you don't know that actually they're a chain of 3, that could still be an SME. So let's say they're in Birmingham, Solihull and Coventry, and they keep coming up on your timeline. Well, if you think that your skills as a marketer, perhaps, could suit them, then you could target them. You could get in contact with them. You could send them your CV or be more proactive, send them some flowers and ask if they want to see a blooming candidate from local university, so you can use your marketing skills that way. Most people tend to use job boards, and on job boards, as a recruiter and as a hiring company, you would be encouraged to upload your logo. So if you are using job boards, of which there are plenty, if you don't recognise the logo, it's usually because they're an SME. Some people discount it straight away because they don't recognise the logo or the name of the company. If you're thinking that a smaller organisation might be right for you, then I would almost do the opposite. I would look on those job boards and look for the names of the companies you don't know who they are and the logos that you don't recognise, and target them and look at all of their jobs and dismiss the ones that are the bigger organisations or the public sector, which are huge, huge organisations that you can get lost in. So yeah, those are two of probably the best ways. Oh, and the internet, of course. Do a postcode search in Google for local businesses, and then you can take out the ones that you're not interested in. So it could be the local restaurants. Well, you're not a restaurateur or you're not in that sector, so just dismiss them. But then look at all the local marketing companies, IT companies that are listed out there on Google Plus, for example, and you could target them that way.
Yeah, and I guess the good thing about the job boards is that you've got the ability to search by location, haven't you? So
yes.
that is a nice, straightforward way of actually narrowing down. Although you could potentially miss out if you search by location is too narrow, there might be someone in the next town or the next county that could have been just up your street. So it's being flexible in your search as well.
Yeah, so most of the time, most job boards, you can search within a radius of your postcode. So it's not necessarily, let's take London, for example, which has its own economy going on, massive economy going on. So if you're looking in London and you do a 10-mile radius of London, you're pretty much going to get every job that's going come up on your job board, and you're not going to know either way. So I would always start with your own postcode if you can, and do perhaps a 3-mile radius and open it up 5-mile and so on and so forth. Bearing in mind, I'm based in Bristol, and I know that it's 12 miles to Bath, but I know that if I was going for a normal job where I'd have to commute during rush hour, that 12 miles suddenly becomes a good hour, maybe hour and 20 minutes on a bad day. And certainly through the winter, I would not want to be doing that at the top and the bottom end of my day. So radius search can be a bit tricky sometimes, because although 12 miles doesn't sound like much, I'd actually probably prefer to travel the 38 miles from Bristol to Swindon because that takes me about 45 minutes, even though it's a longer journey. So you're absolutely right, Mike. Use that radial search and go wide enough that includes what you're comfortable with. So although I'm not comfortable with Bath, I am comfortable with Swindon, so therefore my radial search will be slightly different.
Yeah, it's a very good point, actually, especially the motorway. I mean, you can have your bad days, but on the whole, you are going to get there far quicker.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've helped a lot of job seekers over the years to actually find work with the SMEs. In your experience, why do people particularly want to go down that route of going with the smaller organisations?
So I helped over the years, and we are talking nearly 2 decades here, which somewhat ages me. And actually, we aged me earlier, didn't we, in terms of the reference to when Elton John was responsible for Watford. But in terms of why someone would want to work for an SME, there are loads of advantages. There's loads of reasons why you may not want to work for them, but in terms of wanting to work for them, regardless of what stage of your career you're in, small companies, SMEs, tend to be a closer-knit team. You tend to be able to join an organisation where you kind of know a lot of people. So even in a medium-sized enterprise, which is 250 staff or less, you're quite likely to know a lot of people. You may not know all 250 because that's kind of impossible, I suppose, but you're going to be much more involved and be involved in a closer-knit team to be able to do what you need to do. So that's one really good reason why you would want to work with an SME. So the opposite of that is if you apply to work in a huge organisation like SAP, let's say, they've got tens of thousands of employees, but you may only know 20 of them. And you may only be touching part of what you have to do as part of a bigger picture of what SAP's plans are. So a small organisation, you tend to be able to buy into the vision a lot more. It tends to have to be a lot more credible and a lot more visible as a vision to a fewer amount of people. So that's another reason why you would target an SME to work with. You can feel more valued in a smaller organisation because the person that owns the company or the person that runs the company is closer to you. There's fewer stages usually. There's fewer layers within a business in an SME. And as a result, regardless of whether you're going in as a school leaver or a graduate or someone who's perhaps changing career or a parent going back to work after a career break or someone coming out of big business, corporates or banking and wanting to make a difference, they can do so more easily because the levels between you and the person running the business, whether it's the business owner or the chief exec, there are fewer of them. So there's less kind of to battle through, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Another reason why you would want to is, especially for graduates, I think, but actually this again applies to everyone. Career progression within a small company, an SME, can often be quicker because you have to do more. There are, you may be doing the job of what 3 people would do in a much larger corporation. And as a result, you're going to learn more and you're going to thrive more and that company needs you to do more. So the career progression can be quicker. That isn't to say that in a larger corporate, you're not going to have a very structured career plan. Graduates can join on a graduate 2-year training scheme, can't they? And have a very dictated career plan. But dictated is probably the word to use there for corporate because, well, if Bob joins here as an accountant, then he'll end up here in 5 years' time. We know that because all the other Bobs that joined as accountants have done this over the 5 years. Join an SME out of college or university, and you may start in the finance team, but you may end up in the sales team because your skills may be more easily identifiable and it'd be more easy to switch. It can be much more flexible within a small, medium-sized enterprise. If you imagine a team of 10 in an SME, you've kind of all got to roll your sleeves up. It doesn't matter what your job title is. And certainly when I recruit for that sort of size organisation, yes, I would put an ad out with a particular job title that matches what the job market needs to see, so sales administrator. But what do I mean by sales administrator when there's 10 people? Surely that sales administrator has to literally be good at everything, has to be able to pack up boxes if that's what's needed, has to be able to liaise with couriers if that's what's needed, even if it's not in their job description. So you get the ability to do more within an SME most of the time. I am making sweeping generalisations, I know. But most of the time, you're able to be much more flexible and have more career progression with an SME than you would do within your large corporate.
And it's not just the flexibility in terms of the work. You mentioned apps companies earlier. The technology changes so quickly that you might find from a career point of view it's far more exciting being in a smaller size company that can respond quicker to what's going on in the market rather than the big corporates.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So there are pros and cons, because in a smaller company, although they may be able to be, they may be able to see that fork in the road and go, right, we're going down path A instead of path B, and make that decision far quicker, they may not have the investment behind them, the financial stability to be able to do that. So that's the risk reward you've got to think about, especially with a small tech company like that example of an apps development company. The opposite side of that is, you can also bring your ideas. So if you are a techie, you can kind of say, look, I know we're doing this, but have you thought of this? And the next day you could be doing it. It can happen that quickly in a small company. In a larger company, that's got to escalate up. There's got to be project teams. There's got to be meetings. There's got to be, more meetings, and then more meetings again, and then be told, actually, no, we have thought about it. We thought about it 6 months ago, and we didn't go with it then because this is the way we've always done it. And the way we've always done it has always worked, so we're not going to change it. That's not to say that wouldn't happen in a small company, because it depends on the people, doesn't it? Whether they're that way inclined. But certainly, looking at that example of a tech company, an app development company, you'd imagine they'd be very swift to ensure that new technology is being used.
So just picking up on your point where someone says we've done this for years and we're going to carry on doing it, I guess that could be one of the reasons why working for an SME is not for everyone.
Absolutely right, and I totally agree with that. And that's actually when I do a bit of career coaching with some of the candidates that I help, because inherently a recruiter should be doing that as part of their job. If one of the reasons why someone is looking to get out of their current job is because they feel stifled, they feel they're being told, no, but this is, I know that's a great idea. It's a great, thanks for bringing that idea to us. But this is how we've always done it. We're not going to change. There's no point changing now. I can often say, well, have you thought about a smaller company where your opinions may be taken into account a bit more? The opposite is also true. So where I have a candidate who's in a small company where it comes down to personalities as opposed to culture, where perhaps the business owner, well, it's a family business and this is how we've always run it, and we shouldn't really, this is working, so we shouldn't really change it. Then you may say to them, actually, have you looked at large organisation? Or don't dismiss other small organisations, because if you like other aspects that are real advantages of working with small organisations that we've already talked about, then stay within that sector. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It does come down to, it's the cultural and the people within a business, whether it's a large business or a small business.
We touched earlier about the best way to identify where the SMEs are. Have you got any other tips in terms of finding the actual vacancies within the companies? So
most companies these days, let's face it, if you hear of a company, if you Google it and they're not, and they don't have a website, if they're not online, that certainly raises an eyebrow for most people. So if you see a company, whether it's on your high street, whether it's in a newspaper, your local newspaper, on the business pages, if someone's doing something really cool and what they're doing excites you, have a look at their website and see if there's a careers page. Do not be disheartened if there is not a careers page. Most small business owners I work with don't even think about having a careers page on their website because they don't see themselves as big employers. Big employers have careers pages because they're going to employ lots of people this year. Small business owners should really have, should always be looking for good people. Whether they're going to hire them or not is dictated by their business. So don't be disheartened if, yes, you find their website, but there is no careers page or jobs. I often hear from job seekers, well, I'd love to work for that company down the road. It'd be ideal for me. I love what they're doing. I've had a look at their website, though, and they're not looking for staff. You kind of say, well, how do you know they're not looking for staff? Well, it doesn't say so on their website. Okay. So have you called them? Have you sent them any details? Have you thought about how you can send your CV in an interesting way that gets them to read your CV? So websites are a really good source. The other one is the local business pages. See who's doing stuff that's exciting. You can Google awards, see which local SMEs are winning awards. Award-winning businesses are usually quite good ones to work for, tend to be ahead of the crowd in terms of what they're doing. or they're just very good at winning awards, which is a whole different talk another
Yes.
time.
And if they're
But
winning awards, then presumably they are successful, and there's a good chance they could be expanding.
you would think so. Either that, or they're very good at writing awards documents. But yeah, essentially, that's a really good source. So you could literally Google, small business awards in Bradford, and it doesn't matter if it's from 2012. If you see that one of them has won, fastest growth in Bradford or in the Northwest or whatever for 2012, and you like the look of what they say and what they're talking about and what they produce or what they serve, then have a look at their website. And if you still like what you see, then be proactive. Be as proactive as you feel comfortable being. So if you're not one of these people who will pick up the phone and ask to speak to the MD and say, I could be your next employee, then don't do it, because that's not a good way to go about doing it. But so if you've located, let's say, a party business where they sell everything to do with parties, so be it balloons, be it decorations, be it invites, and you feel you're a marketing graduate and you feel that your marketing skills could really play well with them, but you've looked at their website and you've done a bit of a Google search, a bit of due diligence, had a look at LinkedIn as well, and had a look at the other sorts of people that they've hired in the past, you think, actually, I want to work for them, and they're in my hometown. Fantastic. So they tick a lot of boxes for you from a career point of view, but you don't know if there's any jobs. Just use your skills. If you're a marketer, market yourself. So could you put your CV inside a balloon? I don't know. These might be really, I'm not a marketer. You might be able to see that. Could you put it inside a box, which is nicely wrapped as a present and sent to the MD? There are lots of different ways. Perhaps send a cake. Jump out the cake. No, that is a joke. But, there are ways. Think of interesting ways of getting their attention, just because. I guess the key thing to take home is just because an SME has a website but doesn't have a careers or a jobs page doesn't mean they don't have jobs for you.
And you could be their ideal answer, because they typically do struggle, I guess, to find people themselves, don't they?
Absolutely right. Yeah.
So are there things at different stages of your career that can give you an advantage when targeting an SME for your next job?
Okay, so should we break that down into school leavers, graduates?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And so forth, and then it kind of is relevant for different people. So in terms of school leavers, so you have to stay in school now. You have to stay in an academic environment or an apprenticeship until a certain age at the time of doing this, at the time of us talking. And it's quite difficult for school leavers to put a CV together most of the time, unless they've been working at McDonald's or, had one of those Saturday jobs. But even then, they don't really want to talk about it, which is kind of crazy, because if you worked at McDonald's, then you've worked in a very systems, process-driven environment, which will excite some people. So in terms of them looking for jobs within an SME, well, they could get their trainers on and go and find the trading estates where some of these businesses are. And don't be alarmed if they're on a trading estate either. I know one of my favourite clients, they are an SME. They have less than 50 employees. They're based on a trading estate in Tunbridge Wells. From the outside, it is a trading estate building. From the inside, I can tell you it's something else. It's such a nice office environment with a warehouse because of what they do. And you could literally knock on the door and ask if they're looking for, new candidates at some point, or if they have any jobs coming up. If you make a good impression, regardless of what job you want to go for, and usually for a school leaver, they're starting at the bottom, aren't they, and having to work their way up, then if they're the right sort of company for you, then they're going to be impressed with your prowess, and they're going to be impressed with the fact that you're doing the hard work and actually turning up. Some people may not like it, but, as a school leaver, there's such competition for these sorts of jobs that you need to do something a bit different. You need to do something that's going to get you in the door. Well, the best way to get in the door is to get in the door, literally. In terms of graduates, so they will be overwhelmed, and certainly at university I was overwhelmed with the huge amount of companies that want to hire graduates. And that's still the case today. I know a lot of people say, well, even if I get a university degree, I still won't be employed or employable. You're always employable. You just need to find the right organisations, of which there are many, many, many SMEs in the UK. So as a graduate, you can take two routes. Go down the big business route, or, and this is especially good if you don't really know what you want to do. So if you haven't done a law degree, you're not going to go down the law route, but you've done a more vocational course, then work out where you want to be. So are you going to stay in the city where you've done your degree, or are you actually going to go home and find some of those local companies that your parents' friends work for, or your friends' friends work for, your friends' parents work for, find out a bit more about them. Do they need someone like you who's a keen graduate who wants to basically get their hands into everything, roll their sleeves up and get on with it? Because as an SME, most of the time that's what they need. So it does take a bit of legwork again. Same rule applies. Get your foot in the door by literally getting your foot in the door. Go and see them. Take your CV. Do something a bit different. Make sure you dress smartly and appropriately, and go and do a bit of research, a bit of due diligence. One route we haven't talked about is LinkedIn in terms of finding these businesses. So if you do walk the trading estates and you see there's a company that you think, actually, they look interesting, there is information out there. You just have to find it. And LinkedIn is a huge database of very, very, very many organizations around the world, including SMEs. And you can tell, again, who the SMEs are, because it'll actually tell you how many, when you put your company onto LinkedIn, you are asked to put in how many employees you have, whether it's 1 to 10, 20 to 40, and so on and so forth. So you can easily identify SMEs that way.
That's a good idea, actually, because you could do, in addition to the job boards, you could use LinkedIn to search for companies.
Yep, and you can use the two together. So if you find a job on the job boards, and it's a company you don't know, but why would you know? Because they're a small company. Then you can just search for them on LinkedIn and work out that way whether they're the right organisation for you.
And at the time of this recording, they've just announced 20 million people now on LinkedIn in the whole of the UK.
In the UK, yeah. That's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Very impressive, because there's 30 million people in work, so it's quite a high percentage, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually, half of those people who are employed by SMEs.
So a potential goldmine for people to do their research.
Absolutely right. If we look at, so we've talked about school leavers, we've talked about graduates. Let's look at second jobbers. What do I mean by second jobbers? Well, second jobbers can be one of two things. It depends on what your take on it is. So it'd be interesting to see what you say, Mike, because the first type of second jobber is a graduate looking for their second job. So same rules apply, go to the job boards, go to LinkedIn. The other type of second jobbers are the second career people. So it could be parents who've taken time off and had a few years out of what is deemed to be their normal career choice. So then they've become parents, or they've decided, someone's decided after maybe a few years as X, like I did, I decided to get out of journalism, get out of radio, and do something else completely different, but still use the same skills, because I still interview every day, I still talk and communicate every day as a recruiter. So it's looking at those people is, they've had one career, they've either taken some time out, or they've just decided this is not for me anymore. I've been an accountant for too long. I've now decided I would like to be a belly dancer or something. How do they go about doing that? Same rules apply in terms of finding the right SMEs, because the SME information is out there. It's out there on the job boards. It's out there on their own websites, the SME websites, as well as on LinkedIn and across the internet. And Google Plus is a good source as well. And then the kind of the fourth section we're looking at is people who have had a really broad and deep industry experience. So they are maybe quite senior within their company. It could be a larger or smaller company, but they don't want to be VP of finance anymore. They don't want to be head of HR. They would much rather hand that kind of job over to someone else and go and do something different, but within a smaller organisation where it doesn't matter what the job title is. They just want to muck in and do something and add value to that business. Usually it means taking a pay cut, just because smaller organisations don't tend to have, the big bonuses and the big benefits packages that the larger organisations can offer you. They can offer you other things, which is what we were discussing earlier in terms of the advantages of working for a smaller company. So you've got the executives who want to leave their large corporate life behind, and with that usually goes either a lot of travel or a lot of hours away from the home, and as a lifestyle choice, they're now deciding, actually, I want to work for a more local SME that I can add value to. Same rules apply in terms of where to find out where these jobs are, but the strategy in terms of being able to sell themselves into that company is slightly different. But one would hope that if you are that kind of executive looking to leave the corporate life behind, be it because you've now got a family and you want to do less hours, then usually you've got the communication skills to be able to sell that in and package it up as a service, or as a person that can solve problems for an SME. So it's a slightly different way of selling yourself into a company. And usually the CV needs a bit of tinkering with to be able to align it from what you do within the large corporation to what the SME needs. Because certainly what you don't want is if the business owners, the hiring manager, let's say, they've got 100 staff, if they look at your CV and they might feel a bit threatened if it's very corporate. So you just need to change tack and change the focus of your CV to what you have to offer for that business owner. What problems can you solve, and give them the evidence within your CV as to why you are a good asset to that business, given the experience that you have.
And I know you spend a lot of time working with execs in terms of preparation around their CV, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've managed to quite gainfully be employed as I wouldn't say careers coach, it's careers coaching, but I combine my journalism kind of writing, my love for writing, as well as my recruitment head. So I mix the two together by helping execs and others formulate their CV and put a plan together to write that CV, and then once they have the CV, know what to do once you have a really good CV that you've bought into, that isn't something that is not you and doesn't represent you, but also isn't going to work depending on what job you want to go for.
So finally, Helen, are there any things that, as a candidate, you want to do differently when applying to an SME?
Okay, so if we think about the dynamic of a large corporation versus an SME, large businesses, Marks and Spencers have an entire team of recruiters and HR people who constantly look at CVs. So they know what they're looking for. They're very adjusted to what they need to look for in terms of the sorts of jobs that they're looking at and looking to fill within their business. If you take an SME, they may never have a recruiter on board. They may never have an HR department, in which case it's the hiring managers who are making those decisions. So sometimes I would say, certainly as a recruiter, it is easier for you to make an impact. It's also easier for you to make a mistake. So you won't hit as many brick walls, I would hope, than you would within a corporate. But in a corporate, they would have a process. So usually they'd have an automated email that tells you, thank you for your application, you'll be in touch if you're shortlisted. An SME may not have that process in place because they don't have an HR team or a recruiter. So be as proactive as you feel comfortable being. It counts for both. Regardless of where you're applying, you still need to be proactive because it's still your career that you're dealing with at the end of the day. But with an SME, you may just need to show more of your hand. You may need to show more of your personality and who you are when applying, so that you can guide the process along and not get lost along the way. So I would certainly probably be more proactive as a candidate when applying for an SME role. And if there's no role there, or as we discussed earlier, Mike, if there's no role on their careers page, or they have no careers page on their website, no jobs advertised, have a little think about how you can introduce yourself to that business, because you don't know whether they're looking on hiring. And equally, they don't know if Bob in accounts might leave on Friday, in which case that's your next job. So it's always worth, and the business owners I work with, I always say to them, if someone sends you their CV, take time to look at it and keep it. Always keep it, because clearly they wanted to send their CV to you for a good reason. So don't not send your CV. And depending on what level you are within your career, have a think about networking. Quite often SMEs use networking in a huge way in lots of major cities across the UK and other, small towns as well. And lots of different types of networking, whether it's lunch, whether it's breakfast. So if they're breakfast ones and you're still working, you can get to those, and you can go along as someone who's looking for a new role. That's absolutely fine. Go along with your daytime job hat on if you need to, but you can go along and find out who you click with at those networking meetings. And instead of a business card, you're going to give them your CV instead, or follow up afterwards. So there's lots of different things that you can do, but I would definitely encourage you to think slightly more personably, is that a word? Personably when you are applying for roles with an SME.
So Helen, you've shared some fantastic information with us today. If someone wanted to get hold of you, what's the best way to reach you?
The easiest way to reach me is take a look at the website, which is wingrovetailored.com. I'll spell that because it's rather long. WINGROVETAILORD lored.com, and from there you can message me, you can get my phone number from there, and you can also get my email address from there.
Great. Well, thanks very much again for your time today, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
At Jobs Radio, we bring job search advice and job vacancies to life. You can listen to interviews with guest experts and recruiters through our website at jobsradio.co.uk or on your mobile device with our Apple and Android mobile apps. And if you miss a show, you can always download the latest Jobs Radio podcast via iTunes. Jobs Radio, great advice and great music.